Israel, a small state bordering the Mediterranean Sea, is not yet 45 years old. But the history of its people goes back to ancient times. In this area of the Middle East, powerful civilizations had their hour of glory before falling into decline. Here, some of the world's biggest religions were born. But all these events were accompanied by violence and war, of which the Jewish people had more than its fair share. All through history, it's been persecuted and oppressed. Jewish temples were destroyed, rebuilt, and destroyed again. During the Roman occupation, Jews became scattered all over the world, and in the following centuries, Palestine slowly came under Arab influence. After World War I, Palestine was ruled by the British, and in 1947 the United Nations proclaimed the partition of Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state for the Palestinians. But the Arabs rejected the UN resolution, and in 1948, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt prepared for war. They surrounded Palestine, waiting for the last British soldier to leave. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declares the independence of the new state of Israel. For the Jews, an old dream comes true at last. But for the Arabs, this only means one thing: war. Soon the festivities give way to a much more cruel reality. The neighboring countries start the attack, and the young state of Israel experiences its first war. At that time, the Israeli Air Force didn't exist, and the Arabs hoped to destroy the Jewish state before it could form a powerful and efficient army. Most countries refused to sell military equipment to Israel, and while Egyptian Dakotas and Spitfires were strafing Tel Aviv, Israel's defense consisted of only a few anti-aircraft guns and light civilian aircraft. It was obvious that an air force was needed, and Israel tried to acquire warplanes in any way possible. Junkyards were scoured for remains of World War II planes. An imaginary film society bought warbirds for the making of an imaginary war film, and so on. The pilots were Jews who'd served in the RAF during World War II or volunteers from abroad. One of the first aircraft purchased by the IAF was the Avia S-199, which was in fact a Czechoslovakian rebuilt Messerschmitt 109 equipped with a different engine and propeller. These modifications made the Avia as dangerous for its pilot as for its enemy, and the S-199 was soon nicknamed Mezek, which means mule. Other planes were bought in Czechoslovakia, such as the Spitfire Mark 9. The black aircraft was the personal mount of Chaim Weizmann, the future commander-in-chief. But it was the P-51 Mustang that was to become the standard fighter of the IAF until 1953, when Israel entered the jet age by acquiring the Gloster Meteor. In '56, one of these Meteors won the first all-jet dogfight in the Middle East by shooting down an Egyptian vampire. 1954 marked the beginning of the French period for the IAF, when the Dassault MD-450 Ouragan was bought, soon followed by the Mystère 4A.
I believe that the Mystère was the backbone of the Israeli Air Force. On the Mystère, we learned the meaning of jet aviation. We understood the meaning of flying a jet, because this was an aircraft that does not forget. The American aircrafts, the advanced aircraft, they do forget. They do forgive you, not forget, forgive you. You do a mistake, the aircraft forgives you. On the Mystère, no forgiveness. So you had to fly 100%. This was an aircraft that served in the Israeli Air Force for so many years, and most of the fighter pilots of the Israeli Air Force who flew the 15, 16, Phantom, etc., all of them flew the Mystère. So the Mystère has a special place in every pilot's heart.
By the time the Suez campaign started, the IAF was no longer a small group of mercenaries and adventurers, but a first-class air force. Its pilots were well-trained and flew modern jet fighters, but their number was still too limited. However, the first raid of the Suez campaign was not led by jets, but by the good old Mustang. On October 29, 1956, 4 P-51s penetrated Egyptian territory at extremely low level, cutting telephone cables with their propellers. Their action made a surprise attack possible. C-47s, escorted by Ouragans and Mystères, dropped paratroops who cleared the way for the army forces. A few days later, the Sinai was conquered and the blockade of Eilat, the only Israeli port in the Red Sea, was raised. In the meantime, the French and British forces fought for the domination of the canal. The war lasted only 9 days. An ultimatum of the superpowers forced France and Great Britain to withdraw their troops. Under the close surveillance of UN forces, Israel withdrew from Sinai. After the war, a real arms race took place in the Middle East. The Arab countries were strongly supported by the Soviet Union, who'd already sold them MiG-15s. However, the MiG appeared to be inferior to the Mystère IV in air-to-air combat. It was replaced by the MiG-17 Fresco. With the Fresco, which flew higher, faster, and outclimbed the Mystère IV, the Arabs caught up their technological gap. And the MiG-19 Farmer, Sukhoi Su-7 fitter, and this British Hawker Hunter made things even worse for Israel. But the plane that really upset the balance was the MiG-21 Fishbed. Especially designed as an air superiority fighter, the Fishbed outperformed all aircraft of its generation. The 10 years that followed the Sinai crisis saw the passing of the IAF's last piston-engine aircraft, which were progressively replaced by the Ouragan, Mystère, and this Super Mystère B-2, an advanced supersonic version of the Mystère IV. The Mosquitoes were replaced by Sud Aviation Vautour. 4 of them, like this Vautour 2BR, were destined for reconnaissance and bombing missions, but most of them were A models, highly effective for ground attacks. In 1962 began the delivery of a new fighter that would mark the history of the IAF. The Mirage 3C was at that time one of the most advanced aircraft in the West and had been chosen by the Israelis to face the MiG-21. In the years 1966 to 1967, tension rose once again in the Middle East. The Arab countries started an anti-Zionist campaign. They tried to provoke Israel, and the media called for a holy war to push the Jews back to the sea. Syria and Egypt massed troops at the frontiers, and President Nasser expelled the UN observers from the Sinai. The Arabs were ready to attack. In the meantime, Israel mobilized its reserve troops and waited. Tension was so high now that the slightest incident would cause an explosion. June the 5th, 1967 at 7:45, 180 fully armed jets took off for a surprise attack on the Egyptian air bases. The Israeli government realized that the chance of surviving a coordinated attack led by the more powerful enemy was nil, and decided that the attack was the best defense.
The first day of the 67 war was the toughest, I believe, in every pilot's life, because we flew to the unknown. We didn't have any experience in such missions, because this was the first time that the Israel Air Force striked air to ground on the airfields. Beforehand, the French did it in Egypt in '56, and in '48 we didn't have this kind of experience. It's the first time that the Israeli Air Force attacked air bases. And the most difficult thing to do is to take off from your base, fly over enemy territory, and do the job. This is a tough mission.
The operation was a complete success. In a few hours, 304 of the 419 Egyptian aircraft were destroyed before they even had a chance to take off. Part of the success was owed to the ground crews, realizing incredibly short turnaround times. Sometimes the complete rearming and refueling of a plane was carried out in less than 7.5 minutes. One after another, the enemy air bases came under attack, and Jordan, Syria and Iraq were not spared. 10 Iraqi and 53 of the 112 Syrian planes were destroyed. For all practical reasons, the Jordanian Air Force ceased to exist. But some MiGs managed to take off, most of them during the last attacks when the surprise effect was lost. During the dogfights that developed, the Mirages proved their superiority. And even some Mystères managed to shoot down a number of MiG-21s. The final results would reveal that 79 Arab aircraft were shot down in dogfights against 3 Israeli ones. It was an overwhelming victory, leaving Israel with complete air superiority. The progression of the Israeli ground forces was now protected against airstrikes, but for the Arab armies, the situation was desperate. During the following days, the IAF led several raids on military convoys. Even the Fouga Magistas, which were normally used as trainers, were armed for ground attack. Escorted by Ouragans, the Magistas carried out an historic strike on a military convoy caught in the Mitla Pass. Hundreds of trucks and armor became trapped, unable to protect themselves against the fury from the sky. When the smoke cleared, nothing was left but a several-kilometer-long ribbon of burnt-out wrecks. The Egyptian soldiers returned home on foot. Combats against the Jordanians were extremely violent in the outskirts of Jerusalem, and it was only with the help of Ouragan, used in the close air support role, that Israeli paracommandos managed to gain control of the capital. When the armistice was finally signed on June the 10th, it was obvious that Israel was the great winner, a triumph mainly due to the Air Force. However, the Israelis had suffered many losses: 785 killed, 2,500 wounded, and 46 aircraft lost. The Arabs had lost 452 aircraft and 500 tanks, 70% of their war machine.
What happened to our neighbors after the 67 war, all of them got into a kind of a shock from what an Air Force can do to other Air Forces. And they brought in the missiles from Russia, And that's how the war of attrition started. They wanted to push the missiles to the Suez Canal, and the Israeli Air Force prevented them from going to the Suez Canal.
After the Six-Day War, General de Gaulle suddenly decided to stop all weapons deliveries to Israel. The IAF then started negotiations with the United States, and in 1968, the first A-4H Skyhawks arrived. As the years went by, other versions of the Skyhawk came into production. The A-4N, for example, and its famous camel hump, a bulge that housed new avionics and that Israel also retrofitted to its other Skyhawks. The exhaust pipe was also modified in order to reduce the infrared signature. In 1969, Israel received its first F-4 Phantoms. The Phantom was unquestionably the best interceptor of the 60s and had been combat-proven in Vietnam. The IAF had ordered the most advanced versions of the aircraft, the F-4E, equipped with an internal gun and slatted wings. The Phantom came too late to play a decisive role in the war of attrition, but was intensively used during the Yom Kippur conflict. The war of attrition went on for 3 years, but it was more a succession of isolated clashes than an open conflict. The IAF took part in the battle behind the enemy lines, led raids on military and terrorist facilities, and was engaged in some sporadic dogfights. Soviet intervention became more and more obvious. The Soviets trained the Egyptians to handle surface-to-air missiles, and Russian pilots and fighter aircraft were observed in Egypt. On July 30th, 1970, an aerial battle took place between Israeli Mirages and Phantoms and Soviet MiG-21s. At the end of the engagement, 5 MiGs had been shot down without the loss of a single Israeli fighter. Finally, on August 7th, a ceasefire was concluded.
Even with the ground-to-air missile and the Soviets, if you don't know where are you going with your war, you cannot win a war. Air forces that do not operate like one fist to one direction in the same time cannot win.
When France imposed a delivery embargo on Israel, the IAF had just ordered 50 brand new Mirage 5s that were never delivered. However, thanks to the powerful Israeli intelligence service, Israel was able to get the plans of the aircraft and to build it under the name of Nesher. The fitting of the Phantom engine in the modified fuselage of the Mirage gave birth in 1972 to the Kfir C-1. Finally, in 1976, another derivative of the Mirage was produced, the Kfir C-2, which only slightly resembled the French plane. The C-2 was engaged in the Lebanese War, while the Nesher received its battle inoculation during the Yom Kippur War of October 1973. The Yom Kippur War was the first war in which electronic warfare was used to such extent. The Arab countries now operated the most modern Soviet aerial defense systems. Apart from the SA-2 guideline, which had been widely used in Vietnam and during the War of Attrition, another SAM, the SA-3 Goa, had been introduced. It was radar-guided and was much more efficient at medium and low altitudes. For the first time, mobile launch pads were used. They were harder to find and destroy than the SA-2 and 3, whose locations were well known. Despite their shorter range, these missiles caused the heaviest losses to the IAF. At the beginning of the war, which started with an Arab surprise attack during one of the most sacred Jewish festivals, the IAF was almost powerless. Deadly accurate SAMs shot down every aircraft that dared enter their area of operation, and the Egyptian land forces progressed with impunity. But as the war progressed, the IAF began to regain control of the sky. New maneuvers were used to escape the SAMs. and new technologies employed to jam them. The concept of electronic warfare took on its most full dimension. Joint operations between armor and aircraft managed to suppress many SAM sites. On October 24th, a new armistice was signed. On the night of July 3rd, 1976, the IAF led one of the most daring military operations ever. 1 week earlier, a French airliner had been hijacked and forced to land at Entebbe in Uganda. All the Jews on board had been taken hostage, and the hijackers demanded the release of several terrorists. The Israeli answer was totally unexpected. Secretly, 4 C-130 Hercules took off, one of them with a specially trained group of commandos on board. The Hercules flew to Entebbe, and before the Ugandans could realize what had happened, the hostages were freed and taken back safely to Israel. In 1981, the IAF carried out another long-distance raid. Israeli jets overflew 3 enemy countries to reach the nuclear plant of Osirak near Baghdad. The plant was to produce plutonium, enabling Iraq to build nuclear weapons. The first deliveries of F-16s to Israel had taken place earlier that year, and the IAF decided to use its new bird for that delicate mission. The protection of the F-16 squadron was assured by McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagles. The F-15 had been in service with the IAF since 1977, and the Israelis had hesitated for a long time, wondering if they could really afford such an expensive aircraft. But the Eagle would prove that it was worth its price a year later, during the Lebanese War. On June 7, 1981, 8 F-16s took off from their home base, each of them carrying 2 tons of bombs. A nerve-wracking flight of 970 kilometers at low altitude over hostile territories led them to the Osirak reactor. The attack itself lasted no more than 2 minutes. Each Falcon overflew the target once and placed its load with extreme accuracy on the calculated spot. The plant was left completely destroyed. At the beginning of the 70s, the PLO had established its headquarters in Lebanon. Northern Israeli villages were shelled from behind the frontier by Katyushas, missile launchers that could reach a target 40 kilometers away. In '82, the number of attacks increased, and the villagers spent more time in shelters than at home. In June '82, the Peace for Galilee operation was launched. The army invaded Lebanon to chase PLO forces from the frontiers, and the Air Force was called on to prevent any enemy airstrike. Several F-15 and F-16 wings equipped their aircraft with Sidewinder, Sparrow and Shafria air-to-air missiles. Israel had informed Syria of its intentions, and Israeli pilots had strict orders not to fire at Syrian aircraft unless fired upon. Grumman E-2C Hawkeyes, in service since 1978, would be used as flying observation posts. Their powerful radar was capable of spotting enemy formations over a long distance. At that time, the Arab states flew the latest versions of MiG-21. But most of all, they were equipped with a new Soviet swing-wing interceptor, the MiG-23 Flogger. On June 8th and 9th, masses of Israeli and Syrian aircraft engaged in an enormous aerial battle of World War I dimensions. But instead of light biplanes, these were the most modern and advanced jet fighters. After 2 days, the war in the air was over. The results were hard to believe. 85 MiG-21 and 23s littered the Bekaa Valley, and not a single Israeli fighter had been lost. It was the ultimate confirmation of the IAF superiority.
You know, sometimes the wars are being described in the media more happily than they are in real time. All the wars that I participated in, 56, 67, War of Attrition, 73 war, all the wars were very serious, very tough, very sad. A lot of losses of life and equipment, and it was not easy and not happy.
For the basic training of its pilots, Israel still uses a plane that was already flying before the Second World War. Some of the Piper Cubs of the pilot school are over 30 years old, but nevertheless still on duty. In Israel, more than perhaps in any other country, the pilots form the elite of the armed forces. But their selection and training are extremely difficult. The student pilot starts his flying training only after succeeding a series of tests and a rigorous army training. The ground course is followed by flight initiation on the Piper PA-118 Super Cub. Competition is high, and only the best will succeed and attend the advanced flying training. The most dreadful moment for these young men is undoubtedly the announcement of the failed students.
האנשים שאקרא בשמותיהם נמצאו לא מתאימים להמשיך בקורס הטייס. לפני שאקרא בשמות, אני רוצה לאחל להם הצלחה בהמשך שירותם הצבאי, ולנשארים, הצלחה בהמשך קורס הטייס. האנשים שנמצאו לא מתאימים הם ברטל עופר, ברנע עופר, גור לוי אמיר, דוד אורן, דוד זונרן, הלוי אבי.
After the Piper, the advanced training continues on the Fouga Magister, known as Tsukit, and license-built since 1960 by Israeli aircraft industries. The Israeli Magisters have been upgraded, and it's most likely that despite an already long career, they'll fly on into the next decade. The theoretical training still is very important. The future pilot learns all about jet aviation and is getting prepared to face any incident. Having spent several hours in the small cockpit of the Tsukit, the moment comes for the student to prove his worth. The first solo flight. According to tradition, success will be celebrated in the time-honored manner. When the student finally graduates and receives his wings, the first hours in the Piper Cub are nothing but a distant, vague memory. The pilots are now posted to the various air bases of the IAF. Each pilot lives with his family on the base. Even though Israel is a fairly small country, it possesses numerous air bases, comparable to those you can find in the United States. Some areas of the base resemble more an average village than a military base. There are shops, sports grounds, a school for children, and so on. The airfields are discreetly integrated, but are sufficiently equipped to face any air raid or to launch an attack with its own means. Here, the past is still present in the memories of all. Monuments to the memory of pilots who lost their lives in one of the many wars have been erected in many places. The Israelis are perfectly aware of what they owe to these men. Planes also have their memorials. Ouragans, Mystères, and Mirages are the silent reminders of a turbulent past. For its transport missions, the IAF still relies on the C-47. Although the design of the Dakota is 50 years old, this aircraft manages to survive in the environment of today's hyper-sophisticated aviation. But, like many other countries, Israel's standard transport aircraft is the Lockheed C-130 Hercules. The Israeli transport pilots are among the best of the best. which they prove once again in June 1990 during the Airlift Rodeo. This competition takes place every year in North Carolina and regroups transport aircraft from all over the world. Dozens of Hercules, Starlifters and Transals compete in several events: navigation, tactical flight, dropping of paras and equipment, precision landing on unprepared runways, and so on. The Israeli team accomplished all these events with extreme accuracy and received the award for the best international team for its professionalism. Helicopters play an essential role in the IAF. In the Yom Kippur conflict, but most of all in the Lebanese war, they proved their worth in combats against tanks, land forces and terrorists. The Bell 212 is an upgraded version of the Bell 205 Huey and is the workhorse of the helicopter fleet. Designed for the transport of troops and equipment, the 212 is also employed in a search and rescue role. In incidents like this, the helicopter serves as an aerial observation post and coordinates operations on the ground. Since 1969, Israel has deployed the Sikorsky S-65C3. The Sikorsky S-65, also known as CH-53D, is a heavy transport helicopter. This powerful machine is perfectly adapted for missions at high altitude and in warm climates. For example, it was used in December 1969 to capture a highly classified Soviet radar system in Egypt and transport it to Israel. The Israeli CH-53s have been specially modified for operations in the desert. Besides huge drop tanks on each side of the fuselage, air filters have been mounted. A wise decision, as you can see. For close support and anti-tank missions, the IAF utilizes the AH-1 Huey Cobra. Most Israeli Cobras have been updated to the AH-1S standard, equipped with new electronic systems, anti-tank missiles, armored cockpit, modified exhausts, and so on. With the Hughes 500 Defender, the Cobra was the most feared helicopter of the Lebanese war. The Defender. Smaller and lighter than the Cobra, it's also cheaper and quieter. This last aspect proved to be of great importance in the mountainous regions. In service for more than 20 years now, the A4 Skyhawk is still one of the most efficient close support aircraft in the IAF inventory. Like most Israeli aircraft, it's been modernized several times. The extended tailpipe, for example, an Israeli modification, makes the aircraft less vulnerable to infrared-guided missiles. During the Yom Kippur War, the Skyhawks suffered the biggest losses. But in fact, this was due more to the strategy of the Israelis than to the vulnerability of the aircraft. For very risky missions, the Israelis preferred the A4 to the more recent, but also more expensive Phantom. According to many pilots, until the arrival of the F-16, the Grumman A4 Skyhawk was the most maneuverable jet in the Middle East, which these pictures seem to confirm. The old Phantom II is still operational with the IAF, but it too has been modernized. IAI integrated a new avionics system, modified the cockpit and strengthened the structure. The result of these modifications is the Phantom 2000, a totally new aircraft compared to the original F4E. One Phantom has even been re-engined. The two original J-79s were replaced by two Pratt & Whitney PW-1120s, resulting in the Super Phantom, an experimental prototype that was demonstrated at Le Bourget in 1987. Like most modern air forces, the IAF is able to refuel its aircraft in flight, giving them a greater range. Two different systems are being used. The first is the probe and drogue system and is mainly used to refuel Phantoms and Skyhawks. But Israeli aircraft industries designed another system. Like KC-135s, 5 Boeing 707s at least have been equipped with an oriental boom. The boom operator monitors the operation by means of a video camera. This method is used for the refueling of aircraft such as the F-15 and F-16, which are not equipped to be refueled by means of the probe and drogue system. Moreover, this A4N carries on Central Station a refueling pod. With the pod, the A4 can refuel another Skyhawk. The system appears to be very flexible and doesn't require the need for a large, heavy tanker. The first F-16s delivered to Israel in 1981 were A and B models. The F-16B is a two-seater used primarily as a conversion trainer, but although it has a slightly shorter radius, it's as combat capable as the F-16A. The even more advanced C and D models are now also being operated by the IAF.
The Spitfire, the Mirage, and the F-16 are the same type of ideology or philosophy of aircrafts. The Spitfire was built around the pilot. Small cockpit, maneuverability, superb, short range, air-to-air oriented. Mirage, the same. And it was an excellent answer against the MiG-21 in its time. The Spitfire was an excellent against the German Messerschmitt, etc. And the F-16, same. This is the best answer against the MiG-23, MiG-21. The Mustang, the Phantom, and the F-15, heavy, big cockpits, long range, a lot of munition. Different type of flying. It's not crazy stick and throttle and where's the enemy. Here you have to think, you have to navigate, you have to do a lot of stupid things. Fighter pilots like Spitfire, Mirage, and F-16.
This is the Kfir C-2. It's the latest version of an aircraft that keeps the general shape of the Mirage 5, but is in fact a totally new machine. The big problem AIA was confronted with was that the C-2 was powered by an American turbojet, the J-79, which seriously limited the possibilities of exporting the aircraft. But this situation might change, as plans have been made to build a Kfir that will be powered by a new version of the French-made ATAR 9K50. This new collaboration between the two nations would also put an end to the embargo imposed 20 years ago by General de Gaulle. Surface-to-air missiles are also under the command of the Air Force. Here is a battery of Hawks, somewhere near the border between Israel, Syria and Lebanon. Batteries like this one are on constant alert, and when an enemy is detected, the alarm is immediately given. This time, it was a false alert, and the Hawk will remain on standby. For the surveillance and reconnaissance of territories close to the border, the IAF operates remote piloted vehicles, or RPVs. These radio-guided aircraft, designed and produced by IAI, are equipped with a video camera and a transmitter which sends the images in real time to the control center. Apart from their recce missions, the RPVs can be used to coordinate operations on the ground. The advantage of using RPVs is that they're cheap, easy to operate, and they provide the strategist with a real-time overall view of the battlefield. The Lavi is the sum of Israeli know-how in aeronautics. The first prototype integrated leading-edge technologies and was undoubtedly the most advanced jet fighter ever built. After the production of a second prototype, the project was cancelled at the end of 1987 because of the huge investments it required. However, IAI decided to build a third aircraft, the Lavi TD, for a technology demonstrator. This film was taken during its first flight on September 25, 1989. The TD is powered by a Pratt & Whitney PW1120, the same engine that equips the Super Phantom and the F-18 Hornet. The aircraft is controlled by a fly-by-wire system. Like the F-16 and the new Saab JAS-39 Gripen, the Lavi is a multi-role aircraft, as good in low-level missions as in intercept missions. With or without the Lavi, one thing is sure. The Israeli Air Force will continue to defend and preserve peace on its territory.